Welcome to Sera and Sauti podcast. I'm your host, Sumaya Ahmed. In this episode, we are joined by the incredible Kenyan writer, Carey Baraka. We'll be discussing his piece for The Guardian, where he profiles Ngugi wa Thiongo. After spending 3 days living with him, it's an intimate and layered portrait of one of the giants of African literature. Welcome, Carey.
Thank you for having me, Sumaya.
Okay, in this piece, you give us a glimpse into the life of what you rightfully call a giant of African literature. We are Kenyan. Ngugi is someone who's captured our imagination through stories that speak to our political history, and he's someone we know for his role on post-independence political movements, calling the state that many felt had betrayed the people it claimed to liberate, and he paid a heavy price for it, first as a political prisoner and then going into exile. But then you, first of all, discovered him when you're 6, 7 years old. Most of us just learned of him when you were in high school. And then you went on to study literature at Nairobi University in a department where you say that you fell in love with the idea of Ngugi, not just as a writer, but someone fighting for what African literature could mean. And in university, you say that your relationship towards his work deepened. I'm just curious, Kay, having studied him and knowing the larger-than-life image the continent holds of him, what did you expect to find when you went to live with him to write this profile? And what did you actually witness or discover about him?
Um, yeah, yeah. When you said that, I first I guess met his work when I was like 6 years old. I forgot about that. There's like a book called Nyamba Nene and the Flying Bus, which is like I think it's like that's the first part, and then it's like Nyamba Nene and the Library or something. I can't remember like the second part, but like I remember reading this when I was like in like 6 or 7 in our school library. And yeah. I mean, in case you're not familiar with the story, it's like this, like children in a school go to like the museum, and the main character Nyambanen is from a really poor family. I think he was like a scholarship kid, but everybody else in the class is like really, really rich. And then there's like a mess up at the museum, and then the bus ends up flying, and all the kids are terrified. And the only one who can lead them is the one who's from a poor background, and it's like, that's like Ngugi tried to like, inculcate even like 6 year olds in his class politics. So I think when I went to his house, like there are all these questions that like I had heard about his work for like a long time, which I wanted to ask him. I mean, like Nyamba Nene. I have never met anyone else who has read Nyamba Nene, The Flying Bus.
Never read him, and I don't even know that piece.
Yeah, I remember when I was in campus, like I think like my first semester, one of my professors was asking us if we'd read Ngugi, or like the first Ngugi we read, and I was like the only one who said like, yeah, my first Ngugi was Nyamba Nene, and it's a also even in his house, like I think I was like trying to impress him to be like, yo, yeah, I've read Nyamba Nene, leave aside Live Between. I read Nyamba Nene. And then of course there's like also the books I read and I was like maybe like 12 or 13 in my grandfather's library. The Trial of Vidan Kimathi being like the one I read like the most in that period. But in school I studied River Between. And in our school we always had like this Roma in our boarding school that like the version we had was like the censored school version, right? And
Yeah.
there was like because it's like approved school edition, so we're like there is like a version which is not like a school edition, and we convinced each other like in this like real version, Nyambura and Wayaki have sex with each other. So I go to his house like the first day. It's not in the essay, but I remember asking him, so like, is there like a secret version where Nyambura and Wayaki hook up? Because like, when they're near the river, like you leave it, our version was very hazy, but there's something that was missing. And then he laughed and he was like, yeah, he never wrote like any other um like a different scene. And I guess even same with him was like sort of an accident because like I mean when you're interviewing someone, you don't expect like them to like him to stay in your house, right?
Yeah.
So when I spoke to him, maybe like in September, no, when I think I had a conversation with him early in the year about like That's like maybe in January of 2022 or February of 2022 about like doing a profile of him. And then I talked to him like a few months later in like September about like, yo, I'm coming to California. And he said something about, you can even stay in my house, right? So I didn't know how serious he was about this. I
Yeah.
think that thing, people say things sometimes,
Yes.
Um, but so when I show up when I go to like California, I didn't book a hotel because like, he did say that thing. How serious was it? And I remember talking to my editor about it. And I was like, should I just like book a hotel in case, like, like what if he doesn't remember this? And he was like, you just go without booking a hotel. If you need to like book something, book afterwards, right? So I show up. I think, yeah, the day before, like, I remind him about like that promise he made, and he's like, yeah, yeah, definitely should come stay in your house. So it was like this like weird sense of like this is like a person I read when I was 6 years old. And all of a sudden, the two of us are like, for this spell of days, we are housemates. I have
Yeah.
my room, he has his room, and just like the two of us. At the dinner table, it's just me and Ngugi. Yeah.
Are there like the way you shared the bit where you asked him about Nyambura and Wayaki that didn't show up in the piece? Are there things you guys were discussing that wasn't in the piece? Or are there things that you also discovered about Ngugi? So since you had done a lot of research about him and his work as well
Mhm.
when you're in uni.
I mean, yeah, because there were things that aren't in the final version. Um, so the first draft I wrote was like 14,000 words, and the final draft is 8,000 words. But even beyond that, like missing 6,000 words, most of the first draft was deleted. Um, um, Mostly because I think my instinct is usually, especially with writers, to be like a bit of like, it's like to take like a scholarly angle. Um, and so like the all these bits when like I'm asking him, so like in this book you said this, that's the book you said this. How do they connect? This interview in 1977 you said this, and there's like all this like analysis of like his book, and it's like very, very heavy. And my editor was like, like this is not, it's not that fun. We want
Yeah.
to be so like the final draft has me like mostly just hanging out with him. The first draft, 14,000 words, it's like 1,000 words me hanging out, 13,000 words of like dense, like scholarly analysis of like, oh, in this book, there's like this stylistic change at this point. There's like this that happened. In this interview, they say this. Yeah, so there are a lot of like bits like that, like didn't end up in the final draft. But then also like I sort of like fell in love with 1960s Kampala. Because I'd been doing a fellowship in Iowa, and there's a guy in Iowa called Peter Nazareth who this kind of writer called Hadija Bajaber who did the same fellowship in Iowa like a few months before I did, and she was like, when you're in Iowa, make sure you hang out with Peter. And Peter Nazareth was like, he and Ngugi were like in campus together, and he's from Makere, and I spent so much time with him in his house in Iowa, even if I went to California. And then even in California, I spent so much time talking to Ngugi about Kampala. So all the Kampala stuff doesn't like most of it doesn't appear. We spend so much time talking about like John Nagenda, about like the parties in Rajat Newgy's house, about like Barbara Kimenye, and like Ngugi was like sort of in love with her. Which is not even like a scoop. He says this in his memoir also. People will be like, you're revealing things about Ngugi, but he says this in his memoir. Yeah, and so I fell in love with Kampala. And I spent a lot of words talking about like 1960s Kampala, about like all the parties. Everyone is in love with like Wole Soyinka. There's like Louis Armstrong is in the town. There's like at some point Paul Theroux is in Kampala. At some point, VS Naipaul is in Kampala, insulting everybody he can insult. And so all this Kampala stuff is removed. Like, and I think I cared enough about the Kampala stuff in that essay that I made it like its own essay later on.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so like the scholarly stuff is in there. A lot of scholarly stuff is in there. A lot of academic analysis in there, and then like the Kampala bit was like maybe like 6,000 words or 7,000 words, very heavy on Kampala, and like most of that was removed because the editor rightly pointed out like this essay is not about Kampala. It's about you hanging out with Ngugi. So like all of this stuff, even though it's very interesting to you, is not really working with the essay. Yeah.
Um, there's something you wrote in the piece, which I found quite striking. And it was, you said, so much of the 20th century seems contained within Ngugi's life. And if you're a Kenyan, I found that really interesting because if you're a Kenyan, like that is the moment I was like, if you're a Kenyan, you can actually explain Kenya's 20th century history by just tracing the arc of Ngugi's life. And I'm just curious, like, for you, how did you come to that conclusion? And for the listeners who maybe don't know much about Kenyan history, if you could just give us a brief walkthrough into Kenyan history through the lens of Ngugi's life.
The tricky thing here is that I think my editor is the one who suggested that sentence.
Okay.
Um, and obviously, like I had to agree because, like, I think, like, he's right, yeah, because, like, yeah, he's born in the midst of just after maybe like 13 years after Kenya has become a colony, when it stopped being a protectorate, and when he's living where he's grown up, like where he grows up, his family is made landless because of what was his name? I forget. Like, there's like a church in Limuru which is like built after like the reverend who like stole land from like Okenangugi's family. And they become squatters basically on land that used to be theirs, and then they have to be like. There's a book, there's like a play, which is like basically derivative of his early life. I Will Marry When I Want. Like what happens in the early part of that play, that is that is very much Ngugi's childhood. Like all that stuff, a lot of it like it's directly from Ngugi's childhood. And yeah, so he goes through all that, and then like he's going to like and then when he goes to Alliance, like he is in this like sort of like elite bubble, but like people are being bombed left, right, and center. And even though he's in this school, his brother is like in the forest fighting in the LFA. But another brother of his is working as a spy for like the colonial state, right? So he has all this like stuff happening. And I can't remember. He writes about this in one of his memoirs. Like, was it like just before he did his final exams? He was home, and then like his brother who was like in LFA came home for a visit. And then his brother who was like a spy also came home for a visit. Both of them were there to like wish him like good luck. And there's like this fear that the two of them would like fight with each other and they'll be like, but then like that didn't actually like there was no fighting between the two of them. So he goes through like all this, right? And then like he comes back to Kenya, he goes to Makerere and then comes back to Kenya like just on the eve of independence, right? And it's at a time when like he's becoming like more and more like directly political and noticing all these things happening, right? So like he's like in the same sort of ideological camp as someone like Pio Gamapinto, and then Pio is killed, and it's like, oh wait, that's like a person I spend time with, right? And and then like witnessing how people start getting killed and like imprisoned more as the decade like ends. Um, and then of course he himself is like later imprisoned in 1977. I think like the theory people have, which I guess also like what I wrote in the essay, is that like he's in prison because of the play I'll Marry When I Want. But I don't think that's why he's imprisoned. My own theory, and all this is removed from the story. So when he writes like, so this is like the Bible analyst is really proud of actually. So Ngugi is obsessed with like with alliance in his entire writing. It's all about alliance, right? So Syriana is just alliance. And Livingstone is Gary Francis, right? And it's all and like the plot of the early books is like this like young man educated in like alliance is like, am I African? Am I Christian? Am I Western? What am I? How am I going to unite all these different stands, right? And that's like Alice Ngugi. And then at some point it becomes really radical. And in 1977, he releases Petals of Blood. And Petals of Blood, it's still like the land story. But this time, like Kerry Francis is not called Livingstone, it's called Cambridge Fraudsham because of the CAFR, but also like he went for Cambridge and it's Fraudsham, right? And like the book is just like this, like basically this attack on this idea that like alliance boys are going to like save this country, who are these like stupid people who are like the actual reason why the country has problems. And all these ministers are furious because the government is just like full of like alliance people, right? They are all freaking angry. And Mwai Kibaki is the only government minister who goes to like the launch of the book because he'd been like Ngugi's teacher in Makerere, and he's like, I can't go. But also like Kibaki was in Mangu, so he doesn't really care, right? And like a few days later, they're in Parliament, and Jonjo is like making a speech about like some people here are going for book launches without thinking about what it is, and all the alliance people were like really, really furious. And so the head of like the intelligence, Kanyotu, so like an alliance person. And so my personal theory, my personal belief is
Yeah.
that the alliance people are like, how dare you attack this school of ours? Don't you know our school is the best thing to ever happen in Kenya? How dare you call Kerry Francis Cambridge Fordsham? Yeah, but like I guess it makes more sense that like maybe they play incenses people, or it's a combination of the two things. People are really like annoyed about like you write an entire book about just that because I think Kenyatta's cabinet was like 70% alliance, you know, and even
Yeah.
like the alliance rebel Oginga Odinga had not written like a book against like alliance, and then Ngugi comes up to be like the problem with Kenya starts in alliance, boys.
You talk about K. Francis, and you get asked this a lot. Why you named after him, and you're always objecting to it. And I think at some point you even say like your father regrets naming you Kerry. But for those people who don't know who Kerry Francis is, will you just tell us who he was and the role he played in Kenya's history?
I mean, yeah, Kerry Francis was like was an educator, a teacher. He was a maths teacher, but then he was like a principal. Later on at Alliance, where I think like a lot of people like know him from. But like since I'm from Kisumu, he's mostly important to put from Nyanza as being the principal of Maseno because he went from Maseno to Alliance, right? And so like people, even looking at Oginga's book, like because he was his principal at Maseno when Oginga was a student at Maseno, he writes about like all that stuff. So like, and he was in Maseno way longer than he was in Alliance, right? So like where I grew up, everybody, especially like people my grandfather's age, like they knew because if you're alive in the 1940s and you're from Nyanza, you know who Kerry Francis is, right? This is like the principal of Maseno, and it's like Maseno is like the most elite like school in Nyanza this time. Um, and and so there's always like a thing of like how like different generations of Kenyans, people younger than like 40 will pronounce my name as Kare, but people of a certain age, if you're above 60, you're going to like say Kerry Francis. If you're like 70 and above, definitely it's going to like be like Kerry, right? And so like every single male person I know who is called Kerry is also called Francis. I literally have a brother-in-law called Kerry Francis, especially like in Nyanza. Like there are a lot of people called Kerry Francis. Like yeah, I've to this day not met like a male person I know called Kerry whose second name is not Francis. I mean, even like in the Punit song when like Bonai goes carry forward, carry Francis, right? And so like I guess like the assumption I had for a long time was that I was after Kerry Francis. I think I started like dislike. And because also like the maths thing, all these people would assume that like I'm really good at maths, right? And like the thing is, I was really good at maths. Like I was a maths genius. I mean, even my undergrad degree was like a lot of it was like because I did like both philosophy and like math and literature. And like philosophy, I did a lot of like of logic, and it's like very mathematical. And so like people would be like, "Are you a mathematician like your friends?" I'd be like, "I mean, yeah, I'm like a mathematical genius, you know." Um, and but at some points, I think when I read like Odinga's book, because Odinga is like very like, I mean, he likes Kerry Francis. So after he leaves Maseno, he goes to like Alliance, and then he comes out to Maseno to be a teacher, and Kerry Francis is now his boss. And like he describes Kerry Francis like this guy who is like very, very like deeply racist, like very anti-African, and like Odinga really dislikes like Kerry Francis. I think what makes Odinga like political is Kerry Francis because like he's just like rebelling against Kerry Francis. Kerry Francis is like if you see like pictures of Oginga like after independence at like say independence at national holidays, every other Kanu minister is like dressed in a suit and Oginga is like dressed in like shorts and a collar. He's just like, I'm just a guy. But when he was in Maseno, the rule in Maseno was that like African teachers are not allowed to are supposed to wear shorts. So Oginga would wear suits. You just be like, by the way, I don't like know. Like you Kerry Francis is not telling me what to wear. And then there's also like this other law that like teachers in Maseno are not allowed to have because almost all the teachers are male are not allowed to like have female visitors staying in the house. So Ginga would like deliberately make sure he has female visitors as much as possible. Because it's like this white man is not coming here to tell me what to do. And then like the last fight was about like Oginga didn't go to on holiday in Mombasa with his family, right? So his wife and like maybe he had like one kid by then or two kids. And the laws are like black people should take like the third class carriage in Mombasa. And Oginga is like, no, I can pay for second class. I want to pay for second class. And Kerry Francis is like, no, I can't allow you to like be in second class. And Oginga is like, no, I'm going to buy that ticket. I'm not buying third class. It's my money. And then he buys and goes to Mombasa. And Kerry Francis is like annoyed at him and like he gets him transferred from Maseno to like somewhere in like the Rift Valley. And Oginga is like, I'm not going to a place I don't know. And then he quits his job and becomes a politician. So I become like started becoming like anti like Carey Francis around like 2018 to 19. And my grandfather, I remember I had a conversation with about Carey Francis with him, and he was like, there's an essay actually right about this, just published in 2019 about like conversation me and grandfather had. And I'm saying all these things that like doesn't like about Kerry Francis, like because he's like racist and like my grandfather. And I think we're having lunch in like Norfolk, and we are the only black people in the entire hotel who are not waiters, right? So we're having lunch. I'm like saying all these things about like about Kerry Francis, and like my grandfather is like, no, everybody, Kerry Francis was a bad man. People just thought he was a bad man because he was a Mzungu, and all the Mzungu are still in the country. And me and my aunt at the table, and we're just like, he just said that really loud in a place where we're the only black people. Are this like Wazungu hearing us? Right? And I feel like I've gone into like a tangent here, but like advances. Yeah. But like, so yeah, he's all as an educator. He he has like all these contradictions. There's like a wonderful scene in like in Ngugi's like one of Ngugi's memoirs, which I think is also like in the essay where like he's retired as a teacher and he's now like he's retired as a principal of a Lance, but he still likes teaching. So he goes to like just like hang out at Pumwani to teach at Pumwani as a ordinary teacher. And one time Ngugi is like goes to like give and talk about one of his books. Like Kerry Francis is in the audience, and like after the talk is over, there are questions from the audience, and students ask questions, and Kerry Francis carries his hand to be like, "Oh, like when you say this, can I dare do this? What is the place of writing in politics? How do you balance these things?" And like he is like that inherent contradiction of like he seems to be like not a terrible person, but it's the manifestation of a very terrible violent system, right? So like in Alliance, where like Alliance is like and this is like the charge like Ngugi laid in Petals of Blood, basically. The Alliance is a school that was like in the business of training white black Africans to serve white people. And Kerry Francis was like the head of this training. At the same time, Kerry Francis was like one of the few white people who cared about the education of Africans. So
Mm.
that's a good thing, maybe.
Yeah,
But it's like go to Makerere, and then after you go to Makerere, I'll organize for a scholarship for you. You'll come back here and serve the British Empire. Yeah.
yeah. That's interesting. Your piece went viral
Hmm.
and the reactions all over the place. There are people who are saying it's deeply moving and reflective. Others are uncomfortable, especially with the parts about Ngugi's living situation. So there are people who felt that, African context, that kind of loneliness in an old age doesn't sit right with them. That as Africans, we don't delegate care of our elderly parents to hired caregivers. And then there were others who felt that some of the personal details maybe didn't need to be included at all. And one of those people is Ngugi's son, Mkoma Ngugi, who's also a writer. He tweeted twice about the piece. In the first tweet, he said, "Am I the only one finding this story, well written as it is, also unethical in terms of journalistic standards and what matters and what details are necessary to tell a compelling story? Anything that is gratuitous is unnecessary and gossipy excess." And then a few days later, he tweets again. On the Baraka Guardian essay on Ngũgĩ, we'll read it differently. "I find it unethical," uses the same word again, unethical and voyeuristic, where others find it intimate and informative. I think what Kenyan media has done, which is to take one or two sentences and blow that up, is to be disgusting. I leave it there. Okay. How are you processing all that? Because I think at some point you deactivated your Twitter account, especially the bit where Mukoma is calling the piece unethical.
Yeah, but I didn't deactivate the Twitter account because of this. I deactivated it because of like I don't like Elon Musk. Um, yeah, yeah,
Fair.
I mean, like, yeah, the first unfortunate thing was like that thing people kept on saying about like Ngugi being like this lonely, abandoned man. It's like, you know, it's this like, I don't know, like anti-intellectual like spirit running through like a lot of people who like either didn't read the essay or like were just like, oh, the fact that he's living alone definitely means he's lonely. Like if you live alone, like how can you not be lonely? Ignoring all the things I was saying about like he's on the phone with like his children every day, his grandson like lives near him. And there's also like that thing of like, I mean, to be like very few people really like want to like spend their life living with their parents, you know? You can't just be like, oh my, I'm going to live with my father all the like until he's not here anymore. You want to like have your own life, right? But he's talking to like all his children like on the phone like every day, right? So that was like extremely ignorant, right? And even like an idiot like who's his name? Tony Mochana keeps on like writing things about like Carey Baraka saying Ngugi is lonely, you know? And honestly, it seems like the height of like of ignorance and intellectualism to like read just because like a person is staying by himself, it means he's lonely, you know? Um yeah, but then like I think like Mukoma's charge was like more interesting to like think about. I not just like Mukoma's charge, like, about I think there's like I remember reading like a tweet where someone was saying that like the problem with this story is that like it seems like he didn't like check in with like the Ngugi family to see if it's okay with him saying his things, which is like a really weird like thing to say because like that assumes I'm a sort of like propagandist for the Ngugi family who needs to like get permission from them to like write anything out about them, right? Uh yeah. And I think like um, yeah, I mean, with Mukoma, it's like I think like the writer is like naturally a voyeur, right? Like that is like what you're there to do. You're not there for like other things. Like you're there to like write about the person's life. Like that is what you're there to do, right? And so like of course like Ngugi, because he invited me to like stay with him, and he's been a writer for like 60 years or something. He knows exactly like why I'm going to stay with. I'm not going to stay with him because I want a housemate, right? I'm there because I'm writing something, right? And so it was interesting to me that like Ngugi like emailed me saying like he loves the article and really enjoyed it. But Mukoma is like, oh, all this is like unethical. How are you doing this, right? And I remember like, I mean, Mukoma and I had a sort of like interesting conversation. I was in Ngugi's house because like, so this one time, me and we are like having breakfast and like he's asking me like, we're talking about like Yvonne Wood, right? And he's like, what do you think of Yvonne? And I'm like, oh, Yvonne is fantastic. Like we young writers, we think of her as like sort of like a mentor to us, right? And like he looks at me in shock. He's like, no, what was it? I said like we younger generation, we look at her as like a mentor, and like, and he was shocked. He's like, as a mentor. So if one is the older generation, and he calls Mukoma, and he's like, listen to what this Baraka is telling me. Mukoma, do you know that you and Yvonne and all those people, you know you are the older generation? And it was like so weird to him. He's like, what do you mean? And Mukoma laughs his laugh. He's like, oh, yeah, we'd like to think of ourselves as the new generation, but we are all in our 50s right now. Um, yeah, so like I personally don't think it's unethical
Mukoma
because
knew
like
you're staying with his father.
sorry?
Mukoma knew you're staying with the father as well.
Yeah, yes. We spoke on the phone like when I was like there. Like, I mean, yeah, like all the children knew I was staying there. Um, yeah, so it's like um the job of a writer is to like write stories. Like you're not necessarily trying to harm people, but you're not like trying to be like a propagandist for people, right? And there are all these things which like don't work on a story level. It's like on a basic story level. If you like go to stay with someone for 3 days, for instance, and he's having surgery like in the middle of this like 3 days, you can't just like be like, oh, there's this gap which I'm not going to mention. That's like a very like important thing to put in the story, right? if you're staying with someone and you're interviewing this person for like this chunk of days, and this person is like a really important like figure in like Kenyan history, and like part of like his public profile is that he's married, and you're there and like there doesn't seem to be anybody else here. Of course, you're going to be like, so, like, what exactly is happening, right? Um, yeah.
Interesting. I think so. I wanted to ask you, still on Nkoma, about a year earlier before your piece was published, and a few months before the piece was published, you started talking about some very personal things at home.
Mhm.
One of his tweets, he says, it hurts to see my late mother, Nyambura. My daughter is named after her being systematically erased from the Ngugi or Thiongo story. We literally, of course, and figuratively, will not be here if it was not for her keeping us glued together through the political persecution. And then he also spoke openly about the violence at home, that Ngugi physically abused their mom, that he used to beat her, and it seemed like for a period of time, this was weighing in on him, especially the silence, the erasure, like people erasing her out of Ngugi's legacy. But then, Kay, you know what I found interesting? I also read your Binyavanga piece that you had written for the Republic. It's titled The Many Faces of Binyavanga Wainaina. You didn't shy away from the contradictions when it came to Binyavanga. You gave us a man who played a huge role in shaping the literary space. He gave us Kwani, which birthed an incredible literary movement that we are indebted to as Kenyans. But you also laid out other parts, the difficult parts. You included things that people often avoid talking about publicly, the serious accusations of sexual assault, of turning against survivors of sexual abuse, of tribal chauvinism. And you didn't flatten him into a villain or a hero. You gave us the full human. But when it so coming back to Nkoma, given that he was already sharing these things publicly about the household he grew up in, and given that you are writing a profile on Ngugi, did those reflections come up in your conversations with Ngugi during your research? And when you look back at your how you wrote the piece for Binyavanga, do you ever wonder if there might have been space to engage with what Nkoma was saying?
Mukoma's tweets about like physical abuse were made a year after my story was published. It wasn't before. So like it's like the sort of thing of like if you knew about it, like if I knew about it like before, it changes like the entire aspect of like the piece, right? Um, yeah, and obviously like, there's a lot of like very um like deeply like familial things happening there, and also like some terrible revelations. Um, yeah, yeah. So there's yeah. Had I known about like all that, I mean, because like yeah, when I wrote about Benjamin, I wrote about like the other stuff. They definitely would have changed like the tone of the story. The thing I find like a bit like interesting is, I mean, Mokoma says that like his mother has been like removed from the movie story. I think there's a lot of like context maybe I don't have because like I come to Ngugi first as a reader of his work, right? And Ngugi has a memoir which is like halfway about like his about like Mokoma's mother. The Mekarian memoir is like about Mekarian about like Nyambura. So like I'm not sure exactly how this erasure like has appeared. Um, but yeah, like the accusations about him, like if you're writing a story about Ngugi, it would be like irresponsible to like not write about it. And yeah, and that they had like they been revealed like to me beforehand, I would have been like, yeah, let's talk about this. Like say like in one of those moments when I was in the phone with coma where like I'm writing about his father, had he been like, oh, by the way, you should know about this about my father, I would have been like, huh, that changes like a lot of things about the story.
Fair enough. There's someone in the literary space.
Mhm.
You guys are friends. uh, they said something that really it was especially on Binyabanga, which is
Mhm.
in Kenya we are so deprived of we are so deprived in the arts that whenever someone shows up, we revere them to the point where we overlook the harm they inflict on others. If you look at a lot of the stories written about Binyavanga, rarely do those things come, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious because I think you're 22 years old when you're writing that piece,
Which
or
piece?
the Binyavanga piece.
The one from last year.
Was it
The
last year?
public one.
When did I
Yeah,
publish?
I was a bit more like older than 22 years old.
Okay, fair
Yeah.
enough. But just given like how much he's revered, because to be honest, I think I've read Kwani for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
The only time I found out these revelations about Ngugi were this year, about Binyabanga were this year. You being in the literary space, I just wonder what your, views are.
Yeah, yeah. I guess like that's one of the like unfortunate things about like human beings generally, right? Like you can admire someone's like art and like their creativity and like the way they imagine life, but also at the same time the person is like really harmful to like people of different like from different walks of life. I mean, you can even think of say someone like Chimamanda who like has written some amazing books, but at the same time she said like some terrible things about trans people. And they're all this like um yeah, so I personally can't speak about like why other people writing about like Binyavanga didn't like want to write about other things. Yeah, I remember when I wrote that, actually, like a bunch of people like emailed the Republic, like threatening like legal action. They were like, they
Mhm.
started like a web, like an eponymous like email address being like friends of Binyavanga at Gmail. How dare you say this? These are all lies. And like we had to like had a question like the Republic editor to be like, like we have all this like data, um, and I mean, like the Republic was like very supportive. They were like, because sometimes people just like become cowards and like they throw you under the bus. And like, yeah, every single time like a person is trying to like see you, I've had like editors who have been like, no, let's like think about this. And yeah, so like some people are like email to be like, this is like defamation. How dare you say this? We will sue you. And the public were like, no, I mean, like, if he's making the map, you can sue. And it's been
Yeah,
like years. Actually, since like, I mean, at no point did I ever say that like Nyavanga assaulted anyone. I never said that.
yeah,
What I said is that like he was accused of like the accusations. And if you are like in the Canterbury scene around like 2018, there were all these like people saying things. And even like when he passed away, there were all these people like saying things and like people were like tweeting things. And um like for a lot of us, I remember like talking to like a friend of mine because we were frustrated about like someone tweets something like Binyavanga is like a terrible person. Why are you worshiping him? And we'd be like, tell us how he's a terrible person. Because like, I mean, like me, I wasn't like Nairobi, but then I'd been like in Nairobi scene for like 2 years. I knew nothing about any of this. It's like, can you give us more details? Like, what is happening? Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, in any sort of like world, whether it's like the creative world or the writing world, there are people who are going to be like do incredible creative work, incredible political work. And then also like do other like terrible things in like the private spaces. Um and when you're in the business of like say writing about the literary scene, um yeah, like after the Ngugi thing was published, some people like emailed me and they called me to be like, okay, you didn't know about this other thing about like Mr. Ngugi, about like other people in like the scene in Kampala. You should know this and this and this. So yeah.
it's okay. There's a moment in the piece where you write about the morning before the 2022 Nobel Prize in literature was announced. You called Ngugi and you asked him if he thinks he's going to win, and his response was, "No, the Nobel Committee, they're not interested in people who write in the African language." But at the same time, you share reasons why other critics or other people believe that Ngugi like hasn't won the Nobel Prize, right? So there's one Nigerian critic who you mentioned, can't pronounce their name. I'm just Adawale Maja. P.S.
Hmm.
The decision to write in Gikuyu exerted a heavy price. And then he goes on to say that the artistry that had earned his English language novel so much praise was now abandoned in favor of the crudest possible politics. But then your friend Jennifer Makumbi, the Ugandan novelist, she says that of his plays, they did not rise above the propaganda. So these are the Marxist ideologies that are heavy in his work, and that they're heavily, like, I think people who have Marxist ideologies, or if you have this, how will I say, certain views of Africa, you might be sympathetic to his work. And I'm just curious, like, for you, why do you think just reading his work, spending time with him, um, he didn't, he hasn't won the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, yeah. I think like yeah, what Major Pierce and like Makumi say like makes a lot of sense because there's this like it's like one people have said this a lot, but like I'm just going to quote one person, James Wood, who like is this American critic, and he has like the idea of like what is the purpose of like the novel, or like what is the purpose of literature? Is it aesthetic or is it like social? Is it like political? You know? Um, and and to him, to Wood, that is like the aim of the novel is aesthetic, right? And it seems like obviously like, I don't know, this is just conjecture, I don't know what the Nobel cares about. But it seems like the to the Nobel community also like the role of like literature is the aesthetic value. And at some point, like I mean, Ngugi at some point like did not seem to care about like the aesthetics of the novel. He cared more about like the politics of the novel. So you can see like I mean like a grain, you can see like a grain of wheat especially is like very like borrowed from Conrad. You can see like all these like things he's trying to do with English, all these like things he's trying to do with craft. And his next novel, Petals of Blood, it's like, like I really don't care. I'm not trying to like impress you with like my language. I'm trying to like make a political point, which is very important to me. Um, but like, yeah, it seems like the Swedish Academy like doesn't care about the political points. I mean, just like was it like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, a genocide denier won the Nobel, Peter Handke. Um, and it's like that people are like also like, you should not give him the Nobel because like he denied like all this like he denied that people were killed in like Sarajevo. Um, yeah, but I guess like to the Nobel Committee, like um the point of the novel is or the point of literature is aesthetic, right? So even if you like stretch out like the AWS canon, you can tell like the AWS canon, like the main thing was always like who are we as Africans? Like, how do we define ourselves after independence? Are we Christians? Are we Muslim? Do we speak English? Do we speak French? Whatever. And like, because even the editor of the canon, Achebe, those are the things that were important to him, right? So it's not just entirely about like writing in like in what language, right? But you can, if you read like AWS, you can be like, oh, like I guess like a lot of like, especially like the main AWS people, you can tell like the qualities they have that the readers appreciate, and not the qualities that like a prize which judges like aesthetic like value in like literature as like the supreme thing would automatically like jump for, you know? Yeah, so I think it's also like a thing with like younger generations, with like younger generation writers. I remember like this editor asking me about a prominent Kenyan editor a few years ago, who is like in his 50s, so like Mukoma's generation, right? Asking me about like if like younger Kenyan writers write about like politics with a capital P, to think about like short stories with politics with a capital P, and I was just like, like all these short stories I love by like writers in their 20s and 30s. They're mostly like really like it's excellent craft work. It's like all these things with character, all these things that people really care about. But like the idea of the nation state of Kenya is not like a thing that like excites like 21st century African writers in the ways that like it did like post-independence like writers for obvious reasons. Yeah, and I guess it seems like the Nobel is also like, that's not like our thing. So even if you look at
Yeah.
it at like the first African writer to win like the first Black African writer to win the Nobel. Wole Soyinka, like his craft work is like vastly different to Achebe and Ngũgĩ. So if you're like think about like all those like early AWS people, all the AWS men, right? Ngũgĩ and Achebe on like one side of like the craft divide, and then the other side you have like someone like Soyinka, someone like Ayeko Yama, who are like who really care who seem to care more about like the aesthetics of their work than someone like Ngugi cares. And it's about like him being a Marxist, just like he's like trying to like teach you. So writes a book for 6-year-olds, being like the poor child called Nyambanene will be the one to lead them. That is the important thing you must learn. Yeah.
Then, I think on that same point, the first time you and I talked about having you on the podcast, you mentioned what you care the most about, like the subject matter
Mhm.
that you cherish the most and that you relish talking about is the writing process.
Mhm.
Um, and I came across a piece that you wrote for a longhouse titled Reading the Most Secret Memory of Men in Venice. You describe
Mhm.
sitting with your friends reflecting on the June and July 2024 finance bill protests in Kenya.
Mhm.
One person said it was sad that the protests had died down. Another said dying for what you believe in would be the best way to go. But you disagreed. You said, I am a writer before anything else, and any sort of death that ended with me remembered as a brave protester rather than a writer would be a betrayal to myself. Okay,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
expound.
Oh, yeah. It's like I mean, and I went for so many protests. I was there from like day one when there were like 500 people on the streets. Like I really did a lot of exercise on the streets, right? Yeah, but thinking about that, it's just like I would have been so sad to be like, oh, Carey Baraka was a protester. And it's not like saying that like if you die for like a political belief, it's a terrible thing. Of course, like it's not, right? But like different people care about like different things like more than others. And I think the thing I care most about is literature. Like that has always been the thing I've cared the most about. That will always be like the thing I'll care the most about. It doesn't mean that I don't care about other things, right? But like it's like if like someone was like describing me, I would want them to describe me as a, oh, Gay Baraka is like a guy who reads books, you know? Like that's like, you know? So whenever I talk like even like my classmates from primary school and they told me, oh, the thing they remember about you, the thing they remember about me is that like I'll be walking home from school and reading a book from while walking. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good story to remember. That is like, you know? Yeah, I mean, like even like my childhood memories. I remember talking to my parents a few months ago about my parents used to think I had like terrible constipation because I spent like 2 hours in the toilet. But the truth is like I had like books with me in the toilet. I was having like the best time in my life. So it's like yeah, it's like that thing of like yeah, it would have been had I died and then like and again I went for all the protests. I mean, I felt like the early protests. Yeah, I would have been really sad if like I'm like looking at people from like during my funeral and they're like, Kay really cared about his politics. I've been like, no, that's not like what you should remember the most, you know?
Yeah. In that
Yeah.
same piece, you also talk about other writers who died for their beliefs in politics. You mentioned Robert Serumaga, a Ugandan playwright who was,
Mhm.
who took up arms against Idi Amin. And then you also talk about Christopher Ogigbo, who left
Mhm.
poetry to fight in the Biafran War in Nigeria and died in battle. And you ask this question, was that a betrayal of the writer's self?
I mean, it depends on like what they themselves like thought was most important to them, right? Because
Yeah.
everybody has like their own like thing. Yeah, I personally would never have like I would never have joined an army. I mean, like Sedumaga started his own army actually. He started his own army. Yeah, I would have been like, but also it's easy to say these things in like in a bubble where like I don't have to make these choices, right? I've never like had to be like in a country like fighting. I've never had to be like, um, and so maybe in that like moment like things change because I remember like when I was in campus, we studied like a lot of Okigbo. Me and my classmates we all hated Okigbo. Like Okigbo doesn't make any sense. Like he's just like our mother. Who the hell is our mother daughter? And like it was a source of great stress for us. And like this one time is at a conference like a bunch of African writers and they're asking him, so like shouldn't you write poetry that we can understand? And he's like, if you don't understand my work, he's basically like, if you don't understand my work, you're too stupid to understand it. I'm going to like explain it down for you, right? Um, yeah, and so like, I mean, yeah, like there's this like political idea that they really cared about. So even if I say that like right now, like I wouldn't want that to be my main thing. Um, that like my main thing is literature, but I speak about this from like a point where like I don't actually have to make an active decision. Maybe I would like think differently if I had to like make an active decision.
Okay. Do you think you wrote this thing about Ngugi, that there are two Ngugis, like you can divide it into two. There's the early Ngugi, James Ngugi, who writes in English. He loves Conrad. He listens to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony when he has a writer's blog, sorry. And
Mhm.
then you say that Ngugi cared about style in the piece. He cared about where sentences are placed and words. Did you at any point feel like there's resonance between you and that Ngugi? Given that even there's a part where you say the next Ngugi, style becomes secondary and politics is primary.
Uh, yeah, of course, because of like my own like biases. Definitely, like, I had like resonated that early Ngugi. I mean, my friend Ngugi books are all like his early books. Like A Grain of Wheat, I think is like a fantastic novel. I also really like the River Between. I very much prefer like his early books to like the From Petals of Blood onwards, with the Crow. Though I found Matigari a bit funny. And I guess Wizard of Course is also funny. But like yeah, like because I think like that is always like the thing I care the most about. So it happens. I mean, I write about like a lot of different things. And I think of the one topic which I write about, which I really care about, genuinely is literature and about writers. I genuinely care about those things. But everything else I write, I don't really care about those things. It's just like when you're writing, you have to write about something, right? So like there I'm writing about food or like about like tech or like I really honestly I don't really care, right? So there's like a tech publication I used to write for called Rest of World. And I wrote like one thing for them which I really, really liked. It's about like smart cities, but me I didn't really care about smart cities. But they let me do all these like fun things with sentences and images, Like I was like, this is like what I'm here for. And then like at some point, like they changed the general focus to like being like basically we really care about tech. We like really want you to like tell us about the tech stuff, like in a very like journalistic, responsible manner. Tell us about tech. And me, I was like, I don't care about tech. Like, so I wrote like one other thing for them, and it wasn't fun at all. It was just like no, it's just boring. Like if you're writing about, I think for me, if I'm writing about something I find boring and I don't get to like do fun things, and so I stopped writing for them, even though they pay a lot of money, because it was just like, why am I writing about this? Why am I writing about Starlink? Like, I don't really care that much. So it's like every, and I think like the problem if you write about like different things is that like people assume you really care about like the things you write about. So people are always like trying to get me to write books on all these things. Write a book about tech. Write a book about I don't like write other things about like the whatever the social bubble created by like people going to like American universities or whatever. I mean, I don't really care
I
about
love
anything
that piece that you wrote for The Guardian. It's one of my favorite things that you've written.
because of the sentences, right? Not because of the subject matter.
No, because I
Oh.
knew people that I could point at and be like, yeah, I know who exactly is talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so even like that piece, a lot of people like emailed me like after it was published, either disagreeing with what I was saying or like agreeing. People are disagreeing in different ways. Some people are like, you're pointing like a very narrow picture of like these people in this class and it's inaccurate and like it's not good for them. Some people are like, why are you like writing about privileged people when like real Kenyans have real problems? These people who are on Bumble and going to Gecko, why do you care, right? But when I was writing it, I was just like, this is like some really fun sentences. I was just like having fun with the sentences, having fun with like the style, the like writers I'm trying to ape. I'm like, this other writer. I mean, like that story came across because like the writer I absolutely admire called John Jeremiah Sullivan put an essay called Upon This Rock, where he goes to like hang out with young people in a Christian rock festival somewhere in America. And I wanted to replicate an essay like that. I wanted to write like something like that, right? Jeremiah Sullivan himself wrote that essay because like a writer in America called Terry Butcher wrote an essay about going to like a baton twirling festival and hang out with young people in Mississippi. And it's all just like me, I was like, I really want to write about like an essay like that. I don't really care about like what the festival is about, what people are gathered for, but like let me just like go and hang out with people and then like write about like the entire vibe. Yeah, so that's like what excites me about like the writing process.
Um, I wanted to ask you, tell us about your favorite subject. Tell us about your writing process, how you go about it. Because the thing I really like about your pieces is r- even if like that piece that you said for The Guardian, about guys who come back from abroad,
Mm.
there's a lot of resonance someone feels when reading that piece. When you know people who you're describing and you're like, yep, I can name names. I know people who are like that. Or even the Ngugi story where you feel like moments where when you're dressing him up, like that ability to create that imagination in the reader's mind. Not so much about how the sentences are constructed, but more about how you're able to immerse the writer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're always like different things. Like, so, um, I think like the first things are like my instinct for a long time in writing essays because I started writing essays as everybody does of a certain age by like blogging, right? And like I used to have a blog which was funny, and that was like my thing. I had like a funny blog. At some point I was like, I want to be a serious writer. Like, I want to be like, I'm serious. It's like serious writing. So like everything got like really serious. And so like happens like often that like whenever I write essays, especially essays, with fiction it doesn't happen as much, but whenever I write essays, my first draft tends to be like really super serious. And it's like all this analysis, like um all this like dense intellectual stuff to be like, oh, I read this paper, I read this book, I'm so clever, ha ha ha, you know? And so like the editor of the Guardian Lonely has been really great at getting me to like write about like focus about other things. Like he's been trying to get me to like write about hanging out with people. So like I'm going to tell Ngugi and him is like, no, tell us about hanging out, right? So even like the one about like the music festival in Kilifi, the first draft has a lot of like I mean, there's like a bunch of analysis which is like removed. Like, I mean, like, there's like this writer, Sarah Dipo Manyika. Her PhD thesis was about like the social bubble created when like African kids go to study in like elite universities in UK, US, and France. I sat down and read that thesis. I was like, she said this. And then I had conversations with all these people to be like, let's do all this analysis. And the guy were like, no, just describe to us about the hanging out. You know, what is the vibe like, right? So the Guardian have been like, they're terrible because like the editor, the Ngugi say he wanted me to describe like what Ngugi looks like and what he sounds like. I was like so stressful, you know? It's like, what do you mean what he sounds like? See, he sounds the way he sounds. Like, what do you mean? Right? But they're like,
Okay,
no,
from your piece, I could sense how Ngugi sounds like in old age.
yeah, because they had me like do a lot of work. I was Googling like how to describe people's voices. I was like, how you describe people's faces. Okay, you do this. And the editor sends me examples of like other writers who have done that kind of like stuff. So for that, for instance, it sent me like examples of writers who would like describe the people they were hanging out with to be like, this person did it like this. So like also you like do something, right? So they've taught me like how to like do that. And then like I think like the thing that is like really integral for me, and it's always like a struggle really early on, is finding like the right voice to carry a piece. And so what I tend to do is that like I read other essays or other pieces of writing to like get like the tone of that what that I did and to be like, can I do it like that same exact way? and the writers whose like tone is just like whose tonal work is like fantastic, right? Um, I was reading. I mean, right now there's like an essay I'm working on about the Gospel Crazy, and I was reading an essay by Rachel Katigansa about like going to Baldwin's house in France, and like her voice work is just like fantastic. So I mean, a better example that's an essay called like the portrait of Dylan, the making of Dylan Roof, portrait of an American terrorist. And I wrote a story about like Shakahola for The Economist. And first I started writing that story, the idea was like we're going to like take like Kadzigansa's voice and replicate it. But then it didn't quite work. So I didn't take that voice. But that also like the first thing I do to be like, what is like the voice of like this story going to be? Who am I going to be? Am I going to be like I mean, like the Ngũgĩ essay, you can see like the flex of me being like serious and scholarly, right? And the Guardian editor was telling me like, okay, you should say you are nervous. If you're nervous, say it here. If you're feeling a certain way, say, tell us what you're feeling, right? And then like the Kilifi piece, it's like more fun. It's like more casual. We're just hanging out. I'm hanging out with the girls, like like but getting that tone is because of me like reading other people. So every time I have read an essay about something, I'm just like, each time it's a struggle. Like, how am I going to get this tone right? And sometimes it doesn't quite work. Sometimes I write something and it's published and it's like, oh man, it could have sounded better, right? And then of course, like if you write for different publications, it's going to like your voice is going to be different in different publications, right? So like the Kerry writes for like the Economist, and the Kerry writes for the Guardian. Like those are like different. Like the sound is very different. Because the Economist is like serious, and the Guardian is like more casual. It's like especially like the long read section. It's like more we're just like chilling, right?
Yeah.
And then the places where like I'm even more casual, right? And yes, figuring out the voice, figuring out like the pacing of the story, figuring out. I mean, like even simple things like what is the tense of this story going to be? Is it going to be like a present continuous sort of thing? Is it going to be like a simple past sort of thing? Like, what is like the voice going to be? Like, who is going to be like the narrator of this story? Am I the narrator? Is someone else the narrator? Is like, am I focusing on someone else? Like, but doing that kind of figuring out is really fun because the moment you start writing it and then it works and you read it and you're like, yeah, this is like the stuff, this is the writing I want to do.
For a piece, how long does it take for the editing process to like fully happen for you on average?
The longest second has been like um 1 year.
Oh, really?
It's sort of like if you do long form. I'm assuming you're just asking about like long form. It's shorter thing with shorter, right? Um, yeah. I the Shakahola story took like 5 months to edit, and I was shocked. That was so quick. I didn't like. I mean, I'm writing something right now where like I'm supposed to like send in a first draft in June for it to be ready by September. And I don't know how that is going to be possible. That's like very short. So sometimes it takes like a year, right? Sometimes things happen. Like um when I wrote about what did I write about? The first thing I wrote about for the Garden Long Read was about like flooding in Kenya. Um this the story was interrupted by like the onset of the pandemic. And then it's like a lockdown in Nairobi. You can't like move out of Nairobi. And like, I was going to like interview people and it's like, you know?
Yeah.
Um and then when this after I do like the draft and we're editing it, it was interrupted by the Ukraine war because all of a sudden like that became really like it's happening right now. It's a new thing, and like the magazine divided a lot of like its editorial resources on that story. Since like mine wasn't like as time sensitive, right?
Yeah.
I mean like even the Ngugi story was sort of interrupted by the onset of like the Sudan fighting in Sudan.
Mm.
Because we're like, okay, so they published a story by Nesrin Malik, which took like a week to edit, which is just remarkable. It's like because we're like, we have to like get this. So all the editing it was just like veered to like, oh, carry stuff with Ngugi. It's really cool, but like not as time sensitive, naturally. So like let's like do this thing. And like they did it in like a week, which is like incredible, right? And then like that story, the movie story at some point is like back on the table, and the editor is like, okay, the problem is I'm going on paternity leave in July. So we have to get it done before I go on paternity leave. Because once it starts, I'm not doing any work. So we have to be like, okay, before paternity leave starts, let's just like finish the story so that like by the time it's published, like because once paternity leave starts, that means that like we're going to have to wait until the end of the leave, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, the shortest has been like 5 months. It has been like really, was really remarkable for me. Yeah, most of the time with long, deeply reported things, it takes like a long time to do like the editing.
Do you want to know my favorite quote by you? In an interview with the Republic, you were asked what the most interesting feedback you've ever received about your writing is. What,
Mhm.
no, the most interesting feedback you received about your writing, and you said that it is gossipy. This is apparently a flaw. I don't understand this instinct. I love gossip. I'm a natural gossip. I think gossip is at the heart of any good story. I absolutely love that. Tell us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my stories are very gossipy. At some point, um, yeah, some of my friends banned me from writing about them because I would have a hard like really early on. Like I would hang out with like people and just like I'm just like there and then I don't drink. I'm not like smoking or anything. I'm just like fully sober and fully awake. And I have an excellent memory. And I'm just like, okay, okay, yeah. And then I wrote like a few things where I'm just hanging out with my friends and like people had to like ban me from like because they're like, we like your work and we like that you gossip, but you can't gossip about us. We are your friends. If you do this, we'll stop being your friends. And I had to be like, okay, yeah, but like that is like my that's like kind of like the Guardian say that like I am my exact like essay kind of essay that I write is the hangout essay. Where like you just like take me to go hang out with people. I don't even have to interview them. I just like hang out. And then I write everything down and I'm like, ha ha ha. So this happened, this, and then this. And even when I read people's writing, when I read like people's writing, like I like gossipy essays. Like, especially if it's like gossipy about literary scene, like literary gossip is only bad if you are involved in it, if you're like one of the people being gossip about. If you're that, like it sucks. But like if you're not involved in any of this, you're just like, and then what? You're just reading this stuff, being like, oh, you know, like, yeah. So they're always like, yeah. So reading gossip about writers is like, me, I really love it. I am, yeah, and I think it only sucks. It only sucks if I'm in it. If I'm not in it, I'm like, yeah, give us all the gossip. And then what happened? There's like a piece that was published a few months ago about like Cassava Republic not paying its writers. Bill Bakari is not paying writers and it's like bullying writers. And like it's just, I don't know if you read this piece, but it's by why am I forgetting her name? Um I have a book in my house. She's the legend writer with like the book about food. This is so embarrassing. I shouldn't forget her name. Her book is so fun. It's a green cover, and she's holding like a spatula on the cover. Long thought, you miss Yari Bisala. Yeah. So you miss writes a story about like how like because Republic isn't paying its writers. And like about like all these like interactions people have had with Makaya Yusuf. And of course it's like a terrible thing because like Makaya Yusuf is like the same important figure in like African writing that she's taking advantage of writers in this way. But also like it's so much gossip. I'm just reading every page. And then she did what? And then what? And then I'm texting like other writers to be like, guys, did you know about this? Did you see this paragraph? What? It's so fun.
And when you're doing that whole gossip, like when you said your friends banned you from writing about them, and you said because you're an observant person, but do you take down notes or is it just it's fully immersed in your memory?
Nowadays, I do not take notes.
Huh.
I used to take a lot of notes. Yeah, and like mobile phones really help because people think you're texting, right? And you're just like taking notes. It seems like you're texting, so they're like, the guy is just on his phone, he's harmless. I've been, especially like in public transport, in buses, I am always just on my phone, being like, this is some great material. Yeah, so I take a lot of notes. Yeah, so yeah, because if you start relying on memory is not that. it's not, yeah, it's not that reliable.
Okay. So when you write on your phone, you'll go home and then you'll move it to your laptop, or how does that process happen?
Oh, it's 21st century. I write straight on Google Docs. I'm just like on
Oh,
Google one. It's like sometimes I write emails to myself also. Sometimes it's like an email to myself. But like mostly it's like I'm like on Google Docs just like on my phone being like, oh, so this is happening. I'm just like, this is yeah. So but like I think one of the things you have to learn is when not write about things. Not just in terms of like say like out to your friends don't gossip about them, but like for me at least, I don't want like most of my life to be material for my writing.
mm,
So like I had to learn at some point that like even if I'm doing something really fun, I don't have to take notes. Like I can just like do the fun thing and it's fun. And it's like I would be like somewhere I'm hiking, I'm like with a notebook being like, okay, at this point I felt tired. Like everywhere I was like, I go to like a Gormaya FC Leopards match and I'm like, oh, this happened in this minute. The fan said this. Yeah, at some point you have to be like, yeah, I can't like yeah, I can't make my entire life material for like an essay. I would take notes of things I'm cooking. I'm like, on this day, I discovered this recipe. I cooked it. It was bad. Okay. Another day, and this is the thing. I was hanging out with like this person who I was dating. She said this. Yeah. And it's so I try actively nowadays to like only take notes when it's something I want to write about. When it's something I know, okay, this is I'm going for. If it's just like something I'm doing and it's fun, like I don't have to write about it.
when you met Ngugi, I think one of the things he asked you was whether you make enough from your writing to live on. And you told him yes, and you said, that's good. I was never able to do that. It kind of took me aback, and I'm just curious, like for you, where he was coming from.
Mhm. Sorry? I
Wh-
didn't get the last part. Uh-huh.
Like where was he coming from when he was saying this to you, that he wasn't able to make a living off of his writing?
Um, I don't think that's accurate because you used to like work like full time as a journalist. So, maybe when it means writing, it means fiction, but like before, he's but then also like there's like r- levels of relativity to it. When I was like 22, I used to write a lot for the Elephant, and I'd write like maybe like one essay per month for them, and they'd pay me like 30,000 per essay. And that was enough to fund my life. I was like living in like a bedsitter for like 12K. I would spend 15K and like have like 3K extra for buying books. I was like, I am clearly making a living from writing. If right now I was making 30,000 from writing, I wouldn't say that like writing is supporting my life. So like there's all these like relative things to it. It's like when you're different stages in your life, you're willing to like accept like maybe small amounts of money. But if you have dependence of some kind, you're like, I mean, like if you have parents that you have to like take care of, or like you have like a big hospital bill that like you have to take care of, and someone you're being paid like say 60,000 shillings per month, but you have hospital bills of like 60,000 every month, you definitely are not making a living from writing. But if you have none of that, you have no child, like you're like, yeah. So I think like all that is like relative. So yeah, I would assume like in Ngugi's case, it's like at different points, it's like maybe the money he'd get from like one of his books, if I was given that money, or if you're given that money, maybe you'd be like, yeah, this is enough for me to live. But maybe he has other like requirements, other needs. Maybe he lives in a more expensive place. Yeah, and I guess like everyone is different. But like yeah, in my experience, like I think I have only ever made a living from writing.
Nice. But do you think when you look at your peers, is it the same case for them as it is for you?
Some of my peers are making a lot of money. I get so jealous. Oh my God. Do you mean like my literary peers or my non-literary
Yes.
peers?
Yes.
My
No, no.
literary peers.
Really? Yes.
Yeah, I don't actually know anyone else who's like making a living from writing. Because like it's also really hard to do. Like it's so difficult to do. There's so many things that you have to get right. So like I know just like Kenyan writers, like writers from all over. so few, right? Every writer I have, like I know has like another thing they do to sustain themselves. Maybe they teach, maybe they work in communications, maybe like they do something. Because it's so freaking difficult to just like be like the money from my writings is going to sustain me, right? Because also like writing, yeah, writing doesn't pay that much. It's so hard to get published in different places. Yeah, yeah, and if you're from Kenya, for instance, it's like who is going to like pay you enough to like say like have enough money to like feed yourself if you have like a spouse that you have to feed, if you have parents that you have to feed, if you have like children you have to feed and pay school fees for. Yeah, so I don't really know um like I don't just like say like my peers, even like older people, it's like you can be like, is Nanjala maybe making a living from writing? Maybe she is. I don't know how much she's paid, maybe. Um, but like because even if you think about people who write like nonfiction in Kenya like regularly, and you think beyond Nanjala, it's like, is there like anyone else?
Hmm. Is it the same case for fiction?
Fiction is even worse. And then like there's poetry. Poetry has no hope. There's no. Yeah, fiction, non-fiction is terrible. Fiction is worse, and like poetry is the worst of them all. If you're like writing poems, oh my God. It's almost you're constantly fighting a losing battle.
Why do you think that's the case?
Because of like of reasons of global capitalism. I think like global capital rewards certain industries more than others. And global capital doesn't really care about like creative practice. Global capital is like, oh, you sold stocks this month. Here's the money. As opposed to you wrote like three poems this month, and one of them is a haiku, one is like a what, you know? So yeah, it's always like really global problems, also like global capitalist greed. I mean, if you're a nature writer, for instance, there's like a way you could like make a living at writing for Nat Geo as a full-time writer. But then like Warner Brothers like buys Nat Geo, or was it Disney? One of the two companies, I think Disney buys Nat Geo. And Disney CEO Bob Iger is paid like millions of dollars per year. And the first thing he does is fire every single staff writer at Nat Geo. So there's also like that, like just like high level corporate greed, like all this like small institutions being bought by like a company which like is owned by a company, which is owned by a company whose CEO is being paid $500 billion in a year. When like all the creatives under him, whether it's like actors, writers, stunts people, all these people are not surviving. And then they're like, oh yes, but we have AI now. We can like do AI. And then it's like just like constantly like robbing people of their living.
But how did you make a breakthrough? Because you made a breakthrough when you're really young.
I am still really young.
Yeah. You turned down Binyavanga as an assistant. Like I read that part, I was like, bro.
I mean, yeah, but that's because I don't mean, um, it felt like, I mean, I was very arrogant at the time, and that like version of me felt disrespected. Because I was talking to Minyavanga because I was writing about Kwani, another interview from Kwani, and then he's like, you should be my assistant. And I was like, I'm here to interview you. Like, it is so, yeah. So, just like on an ego level, like, I can't be like a writer's assistant. I want to be a writer. Like, um, yeah, yeah. But I guess like how I've been able to like sustain myself from writing, it's really hard to say. Like, a lot of emails to people, a lot of emails. I'm a prolific emailer, a lot of emails. I think.
Is that how
I think
it
that's
started out?
it.
Like you're constantly reaching out to people.
Yes. Yes. I mean, even now, I'm still constantly reaching out to people. Like, that's another thing that I think ever ends. Yeah, I sent a lot
I
of
thought
people.
I thought now
But,
that you have a brand, it's not the same.
yeah, but also I should say, like, the presence of a place like the Elephant was like very important because, like, if like my monthly expenses are like 25K and the Elephant are publishing one thing by me by a month and they're paying me 30K, like, that was very important. And like, yeah, so a place like the Elephant. Yeah, and the elephant is very integral for a lot of people. Like they publish so much work by so many people, and it's terrible that like the funding streams like died down. Um, yeah, because like, the elephant were like making like a difference to people's life. Because if you're writing two things for them, that's like 60K, you know, and they
Mm.
would like pay me to write all these things I cared about, and it was yeah. So I think like that was very important that like the elephant were paying me that like so that even if I'm finishing uni, I don't have to like try that hard to get a day job because I'm like, oh, I have like I can write for like the elephant. Yeah.
What do you think about these outlets? Like you just mentioned the elephant, like dying down, Kwani, hopefully that doesn't happen to debunk, but we have these spaces that come up and then they can't sustain themselves like financially.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Um, like I guess like the people who get like tenders in Kenya and steal money from government should stop building malls. Like they don't know the value of propaganda. If you get like a good people team of people just doing propaganda for you, like think about how people think Bezos is a good guy because he owns the Washington Post, or like used to think he's a good guy. Just like that's it. Like all this like people can just be like stop with the malls and be like, I'm going to give money to like a Ugandan magazine or Mozambican magazine. They don't understand like the what how how propaganda can be used to sanitize them, you know? Like yeah, because yeah, I've never been involved in like in I don't know how like funding processes work for magazines. I've never been like involved with that. I used to be part of a team which used to run a magazine, small magazine called Carey Review, and um, like that was mostly prepared by the fact that like we were all very young and had a lot of energy and had like almost no financial like needs, no financial like obligations, very little financial obligations, and we're like we're just going to spend all our time doing this like magazine for free, and and it's almost impossible to sustain that kind of like stuff for a long time. You need like money, but then like yeah, getting money is so hard. Yeah, so one always just hopes that like all these magazines like survive. I mean, the Republic in Nigeria is doing some incredible work. Uganda Review just started and they're solid. And you just hope that like there are more of these publications and they have like the financial wherewithal to survive long term. Um, yeah.
Why do you think the Republic is solid? And Kwani could not sustain itself because Kwani had such a huge impact in the Kenyan literary scene. Um,
I mean, Kwani existed for like from 2003 to like maybe like 2018. That's 15 years. And the Republic is still relatively new. So we don't know what is going to happen like in future. So you can't compare the Republic to like Kwani because like Kwani was there for a really long time. And I guess Kwani was unfortunate that like maybe they were a bit like didn't think enough about long term in terms of like diversifying like their financing pathways away from Ford Foundation and all this away from Ford Foundation. And so like when Ford pulled like funding from this sort of like creative industry, whether it's like Kwani or Kwana Trust, they all collapsed, right? So maybe they were either unfortunate or like they were careless in their lack of like long-term planning. But that was like a big factor behind like something like Kwani dying, right? So we don't know like where like the Republic gets its money. Maybe like the source is like not going to like run out. We don't know. Mhm.
there's something you had mentioned earlier during the podcast, and it's your obsession with these writers who have been forgotten, who I think they were studying with Ngugi and Makerere. And there's a bit in the piece where you say that, he's Googling their names and then they're just scraps. And you say that he shook his head and you grieved with him.
Mm.
Thing I found interesting about that is that in that same essay for the A Long House, reading the most secret memory of men in Venice, you say, I obsess often about lost writers, the versions of myself that exist to undertake literary excavations, desperate to
Mhm.
make sure their literature isn't forgotten. And then you go on to name these writers. whom I've never heard any of their names in my life.
Mhm.
You describe moving from through archives and secondhand bookstores looking for them, and you describe this in a manner that is with a sense of urgency. And I'm just curious, one, why do you say that you grieved with Ngugi at that time? And where does this need to retrieve these writers, their work come from?
Yeah. When I was like 18, an uncle of mine told me that I was a cheap sentimentalist. Yeah, and I think that was like very accurate like assessment of who I am as a person. And I think he was very right. And I think that's like behind a lot of ways. But like so many of the times I've cried has been because of like especially African writers, but not just African writers, like writers who are like who are forgotten. Like it makes me like so sad, you know? So yeah, I mean like I mean, yeah. So doing the work of like trying to get like books by these people, it's like so hard. If you hear about these people, you're like, oh, this person wrote a book. This person wrote a book. Where is the book? What like happened to them? Me and a friend of mine who is like, she's like this like brilliant Zimbabwean like writer and thinker. We are like, we're planning like this like trip where we like go to like all this like the places so many writers from Southern Africa used to like live to like try and like dig things about them. So like we have like a whole list, like people like Yvonne Vera, someone like Pan Themba. Um, yeah, I don't know. It seems like very important work to me. And there's someone I know who's a historian. She once told me that like the problem being like a historian is that she falls in love with like historical characters all the time. And I guess I fall in love with literary characters. Sometimes just like a picture of them. I look up, I saw a picture of like, so when John Nagenda died, um, there's this writer from Ghana who was part of like the Makerere conference. He was called, I'm forgetting his name. It's terrible. But I wrote an essay about like John Nagenda, not about like the first time I met John Nagenda in Kampala in 1962. And he's like, we hung out, we were obsessed about like, and he said something like, we were obsessed about the drum boys. And I'm like, what are these drum boys? Like, what is this term? And I do a bit of Googling and I found drum boys, a bunch of like writers from South Africa who are the first writers for like drum magazine. And it's like some people who I knew, SK Mfalele, Bloke Modisani. There's a bunch of people who I knew. And I saw a guy called Kantemba and he was called Mr. Drum. And it's like one photo of him where like he's like leaning back in a chair and he has like glasses on and he's like talking to someone. And I was like, this is the guy. This is the guy. And then like finding out that like, oh, he was like exiled from South Africa. He was cancelled for and it's like true cancellation by the government. It's illegal to like speak his name. And he lived in Lesotho, where he died in poverty in his early 30s. And it's like, and it's like I was just like, like can't remember. I have to go to his house in Lesotho. Like, what else am I to do? Like, this is clearly like what I was called to do. And he died in 1967. So I don't know, it's like a spirit that happens. You read something about someone. Oh, she wrote this thing when she was 19 and it was brilliant. And then she just like died. And you're
Mhm.
like, wait, what? Like, and so the people who do this kind of stuff, like someone like the work Alice Walker did in getting people to talk about Zora Neale Hurston because Zora Neale Hurston had forgotten because like before Alice Walker started like digging her up, and it's like people talk about Zora Neale mostly because of Alice Walker, and it's like such great work that she did. All the work that like I mean Bugasa has done with like Yambo Lugolem, like people weren't talking about like Yambo Lugolem. At least I had never heard of it. I mean, someone had told me about Yambo Lugolem, but I didn't really like engage with him until like Bugasa, and it's like all of a sudden like so like that kind of like literary excavation feels like very important like work to me. And it's like and maybe it's all like hopeless because at some point every writer gets forgotten. But like I still feel like this like urge to like do it to be like, oh, they wrote a book when they were like 25. And then what? Like, where's the book? Can I read the book? Can I yeah, and I guess just like maybe like what my uncle said, it's just cheap sentimentalism.
But do you think on a deeper level, as a Kenyan or African writer, that there's a bit of you that maybe worries about your own work? Because you told Ngugi that you're working on a book. um, and maybe how a literary memory is fragile, um, maybe compared to other places, I don't know. And that can also affect you.
I mean, I don't think it's just like about like my own like literary prospect. And it's just like literature, to be honest. It's like I spend so much time on like YouTube watching like old music videos from like the 60s, being like, oh, she's her guitar playing is fantastic. His drumming is fantastic. And it's all these people, and they died like 50 years ago. And I'm just like, do people know about her? Do people know about this person, these people, right? And even when I read like I like reading things which like people are excavating people from like it. I guess mostly like from the creative from the art scene. There's like writers, artists, musicians. Um yeah, so I don't think like my own like literary extinction is what drives this feeling. Of course, like um I think like part of the drive behind like creating like literature is to have like not necessarily like like an archive of yourself, but like an archive of your own thoughts. To be like, oh, like Carey Baraka existed, he wrote this thing. But I think I genuinely like do care about these people. I'm like, um, again, cheap sentimentalism. Like, I'll read a book. I mean, like the Alliance book or Ginga's book about being an Alliance. And you know, like how like all these Alliance people became really, really important people. And he's listening to his classmates. But not all of them became important. And I'm like, what happened to this person? Like, and I Google them and there's nothing. And I feel so sad. I'm like, I think about like my old like teachers from primary school. Like I think like the problem like not the problem. All the things about like 21st century is that like so much of our lives are online. So you can like Google like your old classmate to be like, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile, you see them, oh, they're existing. I Google like my teacher from class one. I'm like, there's nothing. Does she exist? Like, do people think about her? Do people think about Mrs. Hawala? Like where is she? So it's again cheap sentimentalism.
I think one of the things that comes out clearly in your piece is like, even if it's not said explicitly, is you started reading really early on and you're surrounded with a lot of books as a
Mhm.
child. Um, and how much of an influence has that had on you ending up being a writer?
Um, yeah, obviously a lot. One of my friends jokes that like my uncles were just like trying to raise a writer. I mean, even like the Ngũgĩ piece, I wrote about an uncle of mine like has like a book about like Ngugi and the Nairobi Revolution. So like I knew about like Taban and Okot like really early on. I was like, he wrote this book when I was like maybe like 16, and I read it and I didn't understand most of it, right? And then I go to UN to like do literature, mostly because of this book, honestly. I was like, I have to go to UN or Ibadan, but like UN. And Emma, like, I guess actually before I went, my father was like telling me, like, okay, no, you're going to go literature. You're the one who's going to like read my brother's book and then come and tell me exactly what the arguments are. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go and study literature and understand all these things, and then I'll come back. And I think I'm almost ready to go back to my father to be like, yeah, so he says this. When he says the didactic method, this is what that means. Yeah, so like a lot of like reading in like my childhood. I mean, you have all the um all the like African novels by African writers I was reading. I mean, so my parents' school had like the Nyamanenes, but like I think like more important, and then you have like things like Pesetas and Moses series and all these things people used to read, and Super Strikers. Oh my God, Super Strikers. But like the first point I was obsessed with like with reading was my mother was a high school teacher and still is a high school teacher, and her school was like next to the primary school. And so at lunchtime, me and my brother go like to spend time with her before we go home together. And it was just like my brother would be like watching TV or something, and I'd go to like the library. The library of a high school is fundamentally different from a library in a primary school. Primary school is like all this like Susan and Jane went to the forest, and like the high school one has Ngugi. So I remember like I would go to the library and like read all these like old African Renaissance books. There's a book, I think I was like 8 or 9 or 7, around that age. I discovered Peter Abrams for the first time. I said it's called Mind Boy. So I think maybe I read it because there's the word boy, and I'm a boy, so let me read it. Sure. Peter Abrams, and I was obsessed with that book. I would go back to read it so many times, and all the plot, and it's like sort of a different channel to what you've been reading because if you're reading all the simple stuff, and you're suddenly reading Peter Abrams, and it's like apartheid South Africa, and it's oh, and you're just like, there's like I don't know if you read the book, but like the main character is called Zuma, I think something like that. Like, but I'll just say with the X, Zuma, and he's in love with this girl called Eliza. There's a lot of things happen in the story, but he's in love with this girl called Eliza. And Eliza, but Zuma is like he works in a mine, hence mine boy, and he's like very like manual labor, illiterate and all that. But Eliza has gone to school and she's a teacher, right? And Eliza also likes Zuma, but but she likes the things of white people, electricity, running water, like a TV. And she's like, if I'm going to be with Zuma, I will never have these things. I need to be with a white man. Emma being like, Eliza, what is I was so stressed as an 8-year-old about Eliza. Like, what? Why do you want these things? Like, what is happening? And I was obsessed with that book for a long time. So there are things you don't get as a child. So I read this book when I was like 8, 9, 10, like maybe like 4 or 5 times. And then I don't read it again until I'm like 25. Because I'm like, let me see if I got it when I was like 10. And I read it again and I'm like, I understood everything about from the sex bits. Because like the moments when like Peter Abraham is like, oh, Zuma and Eliza held each other and then they loved each other all night long. As a child, I'm like, yeah, they loved each other. So, and as an adult, you're like, oh, But I was obsessed with that book. And then like once I started like reading like that's like sort of material, and then like you're like 11, you're reading like I will marry when I want, and you're like, this is like the stuff. And then when I go to high school, it's like one of those like really old like colonial schools, like 100 years old, blah blah blah. But it's not a lance. Don't tell people around a lance. But like it's like 100 years old, and so the library has all these like books, and I'm in there in the library just reading like all these classics, and I'm like, um, and so like I guess maybe it's natural. Like if you spend your entire like childhood immersed in all this literature. Maybe it's like a natural thing that you're going to like become a writer. I don't know. I had an uncle who would like when I was in high, how like sometimes like relatives like if your parent is visiting in high school and it's a boarding school, they give like money to like your parent to like bring to you.
Yeah.
So my uncle would give my father books to bring to me. He would be like, and it's like very literary books. It's like Alexander Dumas. It's like, and I'm like, and I'm reading all this stuff. And like my mother also like, I mean, her library was like a treasure trove of like library in school, was a treasure trove of stuff. But she also like buying me all these things, right? And it's really hard at some point to explain to someone, like how like you're a child and you're like maybe 11 or 12, and the relative is like, oh, Kerry likes reading. I'm going to like buy him a book, and they buy you a peseta. And you don't know how to explain. I've just been reading about Eliza and the dilemma of the things of white people. You can't take me back to like, this simple stuff. Yeah, and then of course, like having relatives who are like professors of literature is like very, yeah. And then like grandparents, my grandfather also like his library, just like reading like everything and like all this stuff. And then like all my like toilet, yeah. So I guess maybe it's like natural that writing because at some point start to click that I can also make things like this. And it's like also that to remember something of like if you really care about something, you don't care about want to read a story, the best way to like is to do it is write it, right? And at some point you're like, you know what? Maybe I should like so in high school I started writing a novel. And it's like the first time I was like, maybe I'm going to be like, and I was, like how you're doing like all these like essays on the set books. But I would write short stories also. And at some point, I think our books were collated to like mark an assignment or something when we were like in Form 4 first term, and I never ever see my book ever again, right? Because what happens that like so the teacher like checks the assignment and it's like, oh, it's there. And she starts checking other things and she's like, oh, what are these other things in the book? And she's reading the short stories and she's like, these are good stuff. And then she comes to me and she's like, oh, I can't bring you a book yet because other teachers are reading them. So just like write the next assignment in A4 papers and it's going to be fine. My classmates were like, why is Kay doing assignments in an A4 paper, right? And then my physics teacher would come to me and be like, okay. I read that your story you wrote. That was really nice stuff. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what are the authors that have influenced you the most?
Ah, um, I mean, at different times of your life, you're obsessed with different people. So I mean, someone like Peter Abrams was like an obsession for a long time. Um, yeah, and I guess I'm the right age to have been obsessed with Harry Potter, right? But then like more recently, maybe like as an adult, from like maybe 18 onwards, when I think most of the way of being a writer. At different points, I've been obsessed with like so I grew up in this like very African writers. Like that's all I read when I was a child, apart from like J.K. Rowling. Like everything was like African writers. So I'd never heard of like all these white people until I was like 19 or 20. Right? Not even white people, like Americans. Like I remember going to campus and my teacher, one of my professors was like, "What do you think of Toni Morrison?" I'm like, "Who the hell is that? I have never heard of like that person in my entire life." And he's like, "Oh, how can you be living without Toni Morrison? What is wrong with you?" And so like some of my professors would like during long holidays would just give me books to go with home. He'd be like, "Go and read these 8 novels." And then, so I started reading all these people, and then like look at this, and I was like annoyed that like this like I didn't know all these like classics of European literature of American. I'd never heard of any of these people. So I started Googling best books of all time, right? And the Guardian has a list of like best 100 books of all time, and I'm like, I'm going to go this Guardian list one by one. And I started reading. I read some of them. I remember reading like Flaubert, and I was like, oh, there's some good stuff here. I write out like, what is his name? Thomas Hardy, being like, you know, John Milton, being like, oh, some great stuff. I remember when I read Nabokov for the first time when I was like 19, 20. And then like, yeah, so I started getting like new obsessions. So like at different points I've been obsessed with like with Jonathan Franzen. I've been obsessed with Virginia Woolf. I've been obsessed with who am I? I'll be obsessed with like someone like Ferrante, but like Ferrante in a way that like I don't really like try like Ferrante, but like just like being obsessed with like her as a writer. And then they're always like at some point they discover like nonfiction and they're always like essays I start being obsessed with. Like I mean like if you've never read like nonfiction apart from journalism, just like ordinary journalism, and then you read like Hunter Thompson and you're just like, what? You know, like we are halfway along the road to Boston before the drugs began kicking, and you're just like, what? What? And then like describing all this like whatever American journalism people, Hunter, Didion, Sontag, Tom Wolfe, um, yeah, and then I guess like more recently, I'm going through an obsession with like Rachel Kushner, who is such an unbelievable essayist. Like you read her, or someone like Unpatched, who I like her essays way more than I do her fiction. People like John Jeremiah Sullivan, people like Wright Thompson, someone like Bran Phillips, um, Pasilelo Kantai, who is like a writer people like don't talk enough about. Pasilelo has such incredible essays.
I agree.
Like he has all this like incredible stuff. Yeah, so at different points, I was obsessed with like Lauren Groff for a spell. Yeah, it's that thing of being a writer. You get obsessed with like certain people for like a spell of time, and then you try to write like them, and then sometimes you just read all the books. I was obsessed with like Jhumpa Lahiri, but then I read all her books, and I was like, oh, I guess I should get obsessed with someone else now because like now there's no more Jhumpa Lahiri. Um, yeah, but in this private moment, those are the people I can think about.
Okay. Last question. Um, who are authors you think are overrated?
Haha.
Yeah, controversial.
Um, like.
This is your
I think
personal
that's really hard to
opinion.
say because I think the thing about literature is that like tastes are so like individual,
Yeah,
you know?
subjective.
Yeah, and I think that the second thing I'm learning like the older I get that like just because I don't like someone like doesn't mean they're a terrible writer. You know, like I personally like I mean I just finished reading like a book by Colin Hoover, which I didn't enjoy that much. but it just like means that like she's not like my taste. I don't necessarily think that like it's alright. I was talking like the person recommended the book to me, and she was saying like she loves it because like it's light literature and it's like easy to read. But me, I love heavy literature, right? But that doesn't mean like she's like an overrated writer. It just like means that like me, I like heavy literature, not light literature. And so like, yeah, like that's uh I think like the only time I've felt that has been about like my own writing, I think. And not like in a sort of like imposter syndrome way. It's just like there are things of written which I think are really good, and the things of written which I think are okay. There's nothing I think of written which I think is terrible. I think there's something that written are like they're okay, they're competent, right? And so sometimes people like say how this is like the best thing they've ever read, or this is so incredible. And in my mind goes like, that's because you haven't read a lot of people. So your bar is really low.
Mm.
Like what you're calling incredible is competent. And it's not like yeah, that's like the only time I've ever like felt that about a writer. It's like if someone reads certain things I've written and they're like, this is the best like thing I've ever read, I'm just like, like that's you need to read more things. Yeah. And there's some things of mine, if someone says it's incredible, I'll be like, yeah, I'll agree. Yeah, that's definitely incredible writing.
And there are pieces of yours that you feel like you wish they aren't in the public vicinity.
Um, hmm. Um, Not really. I mean, there's some things which like you say things and then you're wrong about something. You're wrong about something, or it's just like it just means I wasn't as trained of a writer back then, but it's not necessarily that I want to go and like edit my past. It's all okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Thank you, Kay, for your time, sharing all this with us. We appreciate it immensely. For our listeners, we've shared every piece by Kay that we've referenced in this episode in the show notes. If you have enjoyed the conversation, kindly consider sharing it with a friend and leaving us a review. Until next time, take care.